Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's now bi-monthly Facebook Live series with Family Houston. I'm excited that you guys are all tuning in to watch this. This week, we are going to be talking with one of Family Houston's licensed counselors, and she is going to be discussing ADHD with us. So I am Shelley Long, Manager of Communications at Family Houston, and will be your host again for today's Facebook Live. Before I introduce our guest, if you have a question that you want answered about ADHD, you can either message us here privately on Facebook, or you can just comment below and we will have Stephanie answer those for you. So now I'm going to jump right in and introduce our guest, Stephanie. She has a Bachelor's of Arts in Psychology and Master of Education in Counseling from the University of Houston. Stephanie has been practicing counseling for 2 years and has previous experience with working with the autism population for over 3 years. So welcome, Stephanie.
Hi, Shelley. Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you for joining me today. I think this is going to be a really great topic that many people will be able to find informative and helpful, especially during this time, I imagine.
Yes, for sure. I agree, especially because of the fact that kids are transitioning over to virtual learning, so it has been a lot more challenging, not just for the kids, but for the parents as well.
Yeah, definitely. Why don't we jump right in, and how about you start us off with explaining what exactly ADHD is?
So ADHD, it's a neurodevelopmental disorder, stands for attention deficit hyperactive disorder. So it really has to do, it's very much first diagnosed when people are children, because you can very much see the symptoms there. Kids might be fidgety. They might be, it might be challenging for them to kind of sit down for longer periods of time. And even in attention, you see challenges where it's hard for them to focus or hard for people to stay on task.
Okay. What are maybe some misconceptions about this diagnosis? Because I think a lot of people, I think ADHD kind of is a term that gets thrown around a lot, and sometimes I think if someone is just having trouble focusing one day, they're like, oh, I must have ADHD. And I imagine that's not the case.
No. So with ADHD, I think it's very important say if you do think that your child has ADHD, it is important for you to get an assessment from a psychologist. So with people who do have ADHD, you will see difficulty in functioning, not just at home, but at school. So it is possible to get a diagnosis for a preschooler. Some people think, oh, my child is too young to have ADHD, but it is possible to be diagnosed as early. And I say that because it's a brain thing. So, children were born with difficulty in connections in the brain.
Okay, interesting. Who does ADHD most commonly affect? Is it generally just children? Is it maybe possible that like an adult has had it their whole life, but maybe they just weren't aware of it? Who does it most commonly affect?
I think that it most commonly affects children. So we do see it at a very early onset. Because of the fact that, so it has to do with the connections, how our brain was formed. So, and I'll also add to, we were talking about the misconceptions with this. So we do see it in kids, we do see it predominantly in the non-Hispanic white population, which may be, and also predominantly males. So it could be a multiple reason for why that is. So social factors such as, maybe some populations don't have as much access to, mental health care where they can't get an assessment, and males specifically. So you see a little boy, right? He's running around and you might think, oh my goodness, like what's going on here? So symptoms might look differently in boys and girls, which is why you probably see more boys being diagnosed. And then, and then with that in mind, so you mentioned, I wanted to elaborate on the misconception. So with, after some people get a diagnosis, somebody might recommend medication. So one of the misconceptions of medication is that medication is going to cure ADHD. So that is a big myth. So ADHD is, the symptoms are seen very chronic, like you see them later on in adulthood. People might just be able to learn to cope with it better, where they're, they have learned how to pay attention for longer periods of time, or they have learned how to, say if they're feeling fidgety, how can I go on a break and then come back and still be able to do what I have to do. But overall, medication is not going to cure ADHD.
Okay. So it'd be more of helping to manage some of the symptoms.
Yes, for sure.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any other misconception that before I jump to the next question, or do you think that kind of covers it?
Something else that I thought about was that, you might see a child. So a child who maybe is very, very active. And yes, children tend to be active. But there does tend to be a certain limit. Like, is it impeding with the way they're interacting with other kids? Is it impeding with the way they're interacting at schoolwork? So yes, I mean, it is okay for a child to be very much active, because that's always good. We want them to get their wiggles out. But there is a point where, there might be a bigger issue.
Okay. Maybe because something to pay attention to if it's like I feel like with a lot of, mental health struggles or diagnosis, that if it's impeding with like affecting your life, maybe would be a good baseline.
Yes.
So kind of speaking on some of that, I know you were talking about like fidgeting and, not being able to like being really hyperactive and stuff. Can you explain kind of what those symptoms are, and what other ones, like, do they look differently in adults and children? Are they kind of the same all around?
Yeah. So have you ever seen someone who might be like sitting in a chair, might be like really up and down like this, and like they're tapping their foot all the time, and it's just hard for them to sit still?
Okay. Yes.
So that's the restlessness. That's the fidgeting that we talk about. So some people might play with their hands a lot, and it could also kind of look like anxiety if you think about it. But there's, that deeper neurological reasoning for it. So in kids and adults, it looks kind of similar in some situations, but different. As adults grow, they learn to kind of cope with things better, maybe even hide things a little better. Mm-hmm. So in children, I'll break it down to 3 categories. And so the way that ADHD is categorized now in what we call the DSM-5, which is our manual for diagnosing. So we see predominantly hyperactive. So when people who are hyperactive, especially kids, like, you will see that fidgeting, that jumping around, that maybe, running around the classroom, difficulty sitting down, doing things without thinking. So that's where the impulsivity comes in. They might jump off of something that they don't really think about the consequences that are going to follow. In adults, you kind of see it similar as well. You see that restlessness, that you have to be moving, like it's hard for you to kind of stay in one place, because it's something about our body, how our body wants to be on the go. And then with the inattention, so we see kids who might be, overall it's hard for them to focus, hard for them to stay on task. They might look out a window when they're in a classroom. They might see a bird, and it's like, that joke that people are like, oh, squirrel. So,
that is actually true, I imagine, for some people.
Yeah. So yeah, very much easily distracted. It's hard for them to like focus on what's going on, because they can't register it as well. In adults, the inattention might look like they switch from topic to topic, or task to task. So nothing really gets accomplished. Like, this person might think they're multitasking. But in reality, I started on this piece of paper, on this essay that is due tomorrow. And I also started on this other essay that is due a week from now. And then I still never finished the first essay. And then a week from now, I still never finished the next essay.
Okay. Interesting. Mm-hmm. I think those are definitely some things that people could probably watch out for and see if maybe that is something that they're struggling with, or their children. So say someone either knows that their child has ADHD, or maybe they think that they might have. What are some things that a parent or a guardian can do to help them?
So that's a really good question, because right now we are with our kids so much more. So something that you can do, and this is something I personally did with when I used to work with the autism population, was, and we did see a lot of kids who had ADHD as well. So for kids, life is a game, and we have to make it a game. We have to make it fun. So say the child does have ADHD. And maybe it is hard for them maybe they speak really fast, or maybe they run really fast, and hey, like, we're standing in line, you need to stay here for a little bit, or you're speaking too fast. I cannot understand anything you're saying. We're going to play a game. We're going to play the who can speak the slowest game. We're going to play the turtle game. We're going to pretend that we're turtles, and we're going to walk as slow as possible. And whoever walks the slowest wins. Some other tricks that I saw for people who have ADHD, not just kids, but adults too, is, having, because of the fact that it's part of the, like our visual stimulus isn't being, the words aren't popping out as much. Like, say we're looking at a piece of paper and the words aren't popping out to us as much because it's a white piece of paper. Changing the color to yellow. So yellow really is going to get the brain's attention real quick. Yellow has actually been shown in research that it does help not just children, but adults who have ADHD to be able to focus on the words on the page.
Interesting. So as opposed to, like, maybe if you were taking notes, like writing on a bright yellow sticky note or something, as opposed to like a normal piece of computer paper or something would help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's really about how is the brain going to register it.
Okay. Well, that's definitely something that we could, someone could try to implement to maybe help them a little bit. Mm-hmm. Is it known what causes ADHD?
There are different theories. One of them being, of course, like I was talking about, the brain. So when I first learned this about the brain, it sounded very contradictory, but it really opened my eyes to how our brain works and how different stimulus in the environment affects how we are. So you might come as a surprise to you, but ADHD happens. So the way it affects the brain, it's actually because there is inactivity in that certain brain region that is in charge of attention, that is in charge of impulsivity, or like regulating impulsivity. So what happens is, of course, if you have, say for example, I have ADHD and my brain is not able to control my impulsivity, which is something that the brain is supposed to be able to do. So say I have low levels of what we call neurotransmitters in that brain region, which helps us be able to control our emotions, our behaviors. I'm going to be more impulsive because of that. Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, so the funny thing is about the brain is that it develops from back to front. So the first thing that children develop, of course, being able to, we know our emotions, we can breathe, right? We can walk, our heart does what it needs to do. And then the last thing to develop up until we're like the age of 25 is what we call the prefrontal cortex. And this area is where our attention is, our problem solving skills are. So you take a child, right, their brain hasn't fully developed. And you're already giving them rules, instructions, and then it's hard for them to follow those rules and instructions. Now take a child who has also ADHD. What do you get?
That sounds like that must be really, really tough on that child.
Yeah, they're trying. Like they really are, and that's kind of the sad part, right? Like it's just how their brain works. It's not able to register that. So that's where we come in, right? Like that's where the parents come in. We're the models. Like, how can I help you? Right. How can I be that model for you? You clearly cannot control your emotions because your brain just isn't there yet. Let me teach you how to do it. Let me be that person for you.
Okay. And I imagine too, like, I'm sure a lot of parents probably come to you guys asking for help. And I would imagine that counselors definitely have the ability to give them some tools to help them with that. And, give them some ways that they can help their kids manage some of these things. And, hopefully that would be something that people would come to you for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I very much encourage parents to be a part of the treatment process, right? Where kids are learning, adults are learning too, because it's kind of, it would be counterproductive, right? If the child comes in by themselves and people are like, hey, fix my child. But however, you're not learning the skills that, I'm trying to teach your child or your children. And then they go back into the same environment that we're in, and things cycle back over again. So it is important to have a very collectivistic form of treatment, including parents.
Okay. So before, when I first started talking to you about coming on and talking to us about ADHD, I was actually under the impression that we'd be talking about ADD and ADHD, and you very politely corrected me that ADD is no longer a diagnosis. Is that how I would say that?
Yeah. So go ahead.
No, just so like, can you explain maybe what ADD, I guess, was and why ADHD now encompasses both of those diagnoses?
Yeah, so it has made it easier for diagnosis, for making sure, you know, we're filling criteria, all the symptoms are there to have the correct diagnosis, which is why we also see more kids being diagnosed with ADHD, because now we've consolidated a lot more. So in the DSM-4, which was our previous manual, it was ADD and ADHD. They were separated. So it was either predominantly inattentive, and then ADHD, which is the H is for, is predominantly hyperactive. So they were separated. Now with the new DSM, the DSM-5, they have clumped it all together, where it's predominantly inattentive, predominantly hyperactive, and a combination. So it could be a combination of both.
Okay. All right. That definitely makes a little more sense. I was very confused, because I was like, I think growing up for me, you know, I heard a lot of people say, oh, I have ADD. And I guess now it makes sense, now that I'm thinking back on it, that I haven't really heard people say that anymore recently, that it's really just ADHD.
Yeah. And it was a recent transition. I can't remember what year exactly the DSM-5 came out. But now, you know, so I was in college like a few years ago, but yeah, that's when they started coming out with the DSM-5 and teaching more of the clinicians, like, hey, the ADD is no longer a label or diagnosis. It still has ADHD now encompasses, like the label or the diagnosis of ADHD now encompasses everything.
Okay. So the symptoms that someone would have as ADD would be that they would now is part of like ADHD. So inactive, or the inattentiveness is just part of the ADHD.
Right. Yeah, it's either ADHD and you're predominantly inattentive, right? Or ADHD predominantly hyperactive, or a combination.
Okay. And so I know you kind of mentioned earlier that ADHD is not curable, but can you maybe talk about, I know you kind of mentioned some therapy or medication, just kind of talk about what are some ways that you can treat it and manage it?
Yes. So you're right. Yeah, it's not curable. It's the symptoms are very much chronic. Just like, so I'll give a personal example. I have asthma, and I have taken medication since I was, you know, God knows how long. But so I've better learned to cope with the symptoms of having asthma. You know, my lungs have gotten stronger, and it's similar with ADHD, right? We, especially if someone gets treatment or if they receive medication, or if they choose to be off medication, they kind of learn, like, how can I control this impulsivity? How can I control this, the hyperactiveness, the restlessness that I'm feeling? How can I better focus and stay on task and complete my task, right? If maybe I'm having symptoms of inattentiveness. Sorry, Shelly, I lost you. Hi.
Okay, sorry, my computer just totally went out. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Gotta love technology. So I kind of blanked out, so I'm not quite sure if you were able to finish talking about some of the techniques or ways to manage it.
Yes. So I was talking about that, whether So yes, you mentioned that it's not curable. So we just learn to cope with it. Say you do have ADHD and maybe you receive treatment or maybe you even don't receive treatment. We kind of learn socially, like what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. Like for example, it's not okay for me to scream in the middle of a classroom because I'm going to get punished for it. And then teachers also kind of teach kids, and we see that a lot more now actually in classrooms, which is awesome. There's more reinforcement. Reinforcement, the definition of reinforcement is teaching behaviors you want to see more of. So say that a child is sitting in a classroom and they're running around. Now teachers are probably coming in a lot more and saying, or when they're sitting down, right? Because that's the behavior we want to see more of. We want to see more of them sitting down. They say, hey, Johnny, like, good job, you were sitting down. Or hey, Lisa, or hey, whomever. Good job sitting down in your desk, and they get reinforced, right? They say this is a good behavior, and I'm going to do more of it because my teacher is praising me. Okay. Same with parents. I see parents are learning more of that as well, like that positive reinforcement instead of just punishing. Because overall, and I will stress this until the day I die, that positive reinforcement is the best thing for not just children, for adults everywhere. We learn better in that way versus just telling someone no. And I say that because if you tell me no, like I can't pick up my phone right now, well, what am I supposed to do instead? We teach a replacement. It is important to teach people in general what to do instead. Instead of running, well, you have to walk. Instead of saying don't run, can you please walk? Same with, kids who have ADHD, maybe they're like really fidgety. Teachers, educators are a lot more aware of it now. And they say, oh, well, here's a stress ball, or here's like a fidget spinner. Or here's, yes, that fidget spinner, it's coming back.
Okay, those are really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually going to jump off our questions. I see someone in the audience who has a question. How would you go about diagnosing an adult?
So with diagnosing an adult, I had mentioned a few key points of what you might see. What are some symptoms? So I was reading these symptoms out loud to myself and kind of like making a bullet point to myself. I'm like, oh, maybe I know a lot more adults that haven't been diagnosed with ADHD than we thought, right?
Yeah.
So that's a really good question, right? Because now back then, maybe it wasn't as predominant or like it wasn't as well known, but now we know more of it. So say that you have an adult that has ADHD. What are some symptoms? Maybe a lot of forgetfulness, maybe difficulty with completing a task, forgetting important things like where are my keys? I can never find my keys. Where's my phone? I can never find my phone. I put it somewhere and I totally forget where it's at. That restlessness, that feeling that you always have to be on the go, like there has to be something that you have to be doing. Impulsivity, where maybe they engage in risky behavior. So driving really fast on the freeway all the time, or shopping addictions, like spending a lot of money without thinking first, right? Those are the key things where same as we see a child when they jump off of something without thinking about the consequences, is this adult also doing things out of impulse without thinking about the consequences? So you see a lot more of impulsivity with adults.
Okay. So if someone maybe sees some of those symptoms in maybe themselves or a loved one, what would you say, like the steps should they be? Like, should they come and see a counselor? Should they go straight to a psychologist? Do you kind of have an idea of what maybe the best route of action would be?
So either way would work. So if they do come see a therapist, like, hey, I'm having trouble staying on task, I'm having trouble with accomplishing, like I always start something and never finish it. Or I'm very impulsive, I have this shopping addiction, or like I'm a gambler, things like that. And they want to focus on that. Usually the clinician will kind of hear those things and they'll say, maybe have you ever been or they'll kind of maybe like, hey, how were you in school? Were you able to finish tasks there if that's an issue? How were your grades? And then from then on, the clinician might get the idea, like maybe there's something else going on here. Mm-hmm. It's been a chronic, lifelong thing that you've had an issue with, and they might suggest for you to go and to get an assessment. So either way would work. You can get an assessment first to kind of know whether ADHD is there or not. or you can always go to a clinician as well, to see like if you're trying to focus on, reducing those behaviors that might be impeding you from daily functioning. Clinicians will know. They'll be like, okay, there's a red flag here.
Okay, they can probably help you work through some of those, and they would probably be a good tool to know if you probably need to escalate that to the next level of a psychologist or talking with someone who can discuss medication options with you if that is needed, that a doctor could help with.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. I'm going to jump back to our questions now. What are some ways, I know, with school happening right now, it's all up in the air, but regardless, I imagine virtual learning is just going to be a big part of the school year. And as you mentioned, we're spending a lot more times with our children. And so parents are probably going to have to, take on some more responsibility with this. So what are some ways that a parent can help their child who has ADHD with virtual learning?
Okay. So structure is the most important thing, because children, not just children in general, but on top of that, children who have ADHD thrive off of structure. They know, because it is hard for them to stay on task. If they have a set schedule, they know, oh, from 9 to 10, I do math. 10 to 11, I do this. 11 to 12, I go to lunch, and I have this much time. So it is important to set up a schedule with your child, and specifically a learning area. So I call it the learning area because this area needs to be very specific. So say that you have a child with ADHD and it's hard for them to, say it's predominantly inattentive, even hyperactive, just overall, right? They have maybe hyperactivity or inattentiveness, or again, the combination. If they're in an area where they have a giant window or they have a giant poster in front of them, what's going to happen?
They're going to look out that window.
Yes. Are they going to finish their task? Probably not. So this learning area has to be free of distractions. Some people even suggested, like, if they're looking at a computer, which they probably are, having blinders right here, right? So their eyes won't drift different directions, just like we used to do, take our tests in those little blinders.
Right.
Let's do that and have those blinders be as plain and as boring as possible, because we're trying to focus. We want the computer to be the exciting part, right?
Okay.
Which is important, right? We want that the brain to be stimulated by what's in front of them and not what's around them. Mm-hmm. So no distractions is always good. Again, having like no phone, TV, unless some people do thrive if they have a little bit of like background music. If it is going to be on, if your child is able to focus better that way, again, have it to be soft music, so that way they're still getting that stimulation, but still able to complete their task, right? Something else could be setting alarms. So you can set alarm on your phone, like at this time you're gonna have a break. Breaks are very important, and I'll get to that. So from this time to this time, we're gonna do this subject. At this time, we're gonna have breaks. At this time, we can go outside and run. At this time, this assignment is due, like having like that visual calendar, so that way they know when things are done. And the important about this is that they're also involved in the structure and the setting up of the schedule, so that way they learn to be independent, right? We can check up, us as parents, we're going to check up on them to, like, hey, have you finished this? Mm-hmm. Say yes or no. Okay, well, let's talk about like what we can do to finish this task. But they're going to be the ones doing it. We're not going to be doing it for them. We can check in on them. And then if you need more help, asking teachers, asking whoever is around in the support system at the school to see what other things you can implement or do to help your child. But the main takeaway is for them to do it themselves, right? Like, we cannot do their task for them. We cannot do their homework. I can teach you how to set up your calendar. I can teach you how to set up your alarm. And then from then on, you're smart, you're responsible, you got this, right?
I like it.
Okay, and then maybe some other things, because again, virtual learning is very much like, it's going to be the main focus for God knows how long. I was going to say about breaks. So it is a very, very, very important, not just for kids, but for adults in general, to have movement breaks. So at the other location that I used to work at, we had, can't remember what it was called, but it was like our wiggle time. So at this for like 10, 15 minutes, allow your child to get up. They need to get their wiggles out, or else you might notice maybe later on in the day, they're a lot more restless, they're a lot more fidgety because all that energy is still bottled up in them. So you want to schedule those breaks throughout the day, so that way by the end of the day, it's not like just this giant ball of like energy. Yeah. And they're not going to be able to focus, right?
Right.
So allowing that exercise time, you can run around at this time, and also making sure that their environment is suited for them. So some kids, they really they cannot focus when they're sitting in a chair. Allow them to sit on the floor if they want to, a beanbag maybe, even working outside. So if they're able to focus outside, right? If they have like that, if that environment is still like a good place for them, it'll be more helpful for them to thrive. Then yeah, like let's go have a class outside. Do your homework outside if that's freeing and refreshing for you, and that way it's easier for them to also have their breaks, right? Say, like I'm going to do this assignment, and then after that I can get to run around, go on my swing, or do whatever.
Okay. I think those are probably really helpful. I don't think we have any other audience questions, and I don't have any other questions. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch on, or do you think that you've covered everything you wanted to?
I think so. If anything, maybe the last thing would be, people who have, like kids who have ADHD are more than likely in what we call an IEP. I'm trying to remember what it stands for. An individualized education program. Okay. So their classes or their assignments are more tailored to help them thrive. So that program is still on. It's still available through virtual learning. So okay. Ask your school, ask your teachers, ask whomever you need to see what is available right now for virtual learning through that program.
Yeah, I think that's a really good reminder that we need to ask for these tools to, we want the kids and children and all of us to be successful. So like, let's ask for help and utilize those resources that are available to us. And I know you actually gave me a couple of resources. So I'm going to throw in the comments section, 1 or 2 resources that Stephanie gave me for a little more information on ADHD if anyone is looking for it. Otherwise, I think that's all we have for today. And if you have other questions later on, you can always message us or email us. Our email is family@familyhouston.org. And if you want to set up an appointment with a therapist, you can do that as well, whether that be for ADHD or symptoms of it, or maybe it's anxiety, depression, relationship stress, all of those things. We are here to help. So we're just a phone call away. And you can also find more information about us at our website, which is familyhouston.org. So Stephanie, thank you for taking time out of your day-to-day to talk to us. I really appreciate it. And I think this is just really helpful for many people to just have a better understanding of what this diagnosis exactly is.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. And I see one quick question on the chat. Can I answer that real quick?
Is it different from 504 program?
The 504 program, I've actually never heard of that one. So the only one that I've ever heard of was the IEP, which is the Individualized Education Program. The 504, I'm trying to think back. Yeah, I can't. I'm not sure about that one.
We can definitely look that up, though, and we can get back to you about if it's different or not. So we'll check back with that question. And so otherwise, I think that's all we have. So thank you again, Stephanie. And if anyone needs us, we're here to help. So please reach out to us.
All right. Thank you, Shelly.